first time I've been catcalled. That's pretty great. That's pretty great. I am very happy to be back for a second bite at the apple, a second run through the dessert buffet to talk with you this week. Let's take a moment to kind of center in. May the words of my mouth and meditations of all our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, and may more light and more truth break forth from your holy word. Amen. All week I have been with this topic of resilience, and I felt like if I was going to have a walk-up song, it should have been, I get knocked down, but I get up again. So one of the great gifts of preaching, giving a talk is that all week long I get to marinate in the topic for the week. And usually, giving a talk on joy or forgiveness or something, that's great. I did a sermon series once on the 7 deadly sins. That about took me out. That was rough. That was rough. But this week has been resilience. And so the first thing that happened after Sunday morning's talk on resistance, I went home and watched the NFC football championship game with the Seahawks and the Rams. Yeah. All right. And that was really a lot of fun. But I was noticing that in football, of course, most of the plays end with somebody getting knocked down or somebody throwing themselves at somebody else to get knocked down. And I'm looking at all of these young men throw themselves on the ground and then roll up and get back up again. I'm thinking, if that were to happen to me at this point in my life, it would take more than a minute to get back up again. But how they are so thoroughly trained for that resilience. The football players are so thoroughly trained. Many of them have their own dietitians, their own trainers. They get physically ready, they're mentally ready to get knocked down so they can get up again. And I was noticing at the end of the game, one of the Seahawks players wound up on the sidelines over on the Rams side. And it was near the end of the game, and it was pretty tense for the Rams. But one of the Rams coaching staff reached down to pick up the Seahawks player. And I was like, that's beautiful. You know, there's a message here, this idea that sometimes that resilience, sometimes that help comes from unexpected places. And that's a beautiful thing. But at the same time, I was noticing that as many times as the guys get knocked down, and that is the game of football, to get knocked down and get back up again, the expectation is that they pop up immediately, right? And I think that in our lives in the United States, there is a lot of pressure, if you get knocked down, to get up immediately. And sometimes that's great because, another meal is going to need to appear on the table. Whatever happened, if it was a stumble, if it was a cyclone, whatever it is, there's that need when you get knocked down to get back up again. But sometimes getting knocked down and trying to get up again, like right away, reflexively, without thinking, might not be such a good idea. Because we think of resilience as like, I got to get back to the way things were before. And maybe we want to reconsider that. So I got to watch the football game, and one of the things that I noticed in trying to get set up to watch the football game and get a subscription to a streaming platform that would allow me to do so was that my computer was broken, my laptop was broken. And at some point between being at worship here on Sunday and getting home, my laptop had gotten broken. And it was very reasonable to assume that it had been broken sometime while I was here. And easy to happen. Might have been kicked, might have fallen, might have gotten accidentally stepped on. No big deal. But one of the things that I have learned about when misfortune happens is, start to communicate. Start to communicate and start to try to understand what occurred. So I reached out to the folks here at FOOF and let them know this had happened. They very generously offered to help pay for the repair or replacement of the computer, and I thought, that's great. But I decided not to go with my initial strategy, which has been get knocked down, get the computer to get knocked down, and go out to Best Buy and buy a brand new computer. I decided to wait a little bit and to see what I could learn and see what maybe repairing the laptop might entail. And because the group here, Florence Technical Service down on Bay Street, they're great, but they don't open until Wednesday. So I had a couple of days to figure out what was going on with my computer, and I started to research about it and found out that this computer, an HP Envy, has a known problem for breaking exactly in the way that my laptop had broken. So much so that there is a class action lawsuit against HP. And so this problem is very well known, but HP continues to design computers that have the same flaw. And in fact, this weakness is designed into the computer because HP, and I'm so sorry to say this because there was a time I worked for HP and they were very proud of their products. They figure it is less expensive for them to pay the lawyers than to fix the problem with the computer. So underneath my initial thinking, underneath my initial kind of reflexive desire to be resilient and just get right back up and buy a new computer, I discovered a structural, systemic issue that was underlying the whole thing. And I think about how people go through really awful tragedies. This, what I experienced, was a minor inconvenience, but people go through really awful, terrible tragedies. A cyclone or a fire or a tornado comes through. And it's always the poor people who get wiped out. It's always the folks in the most insecure housing that get wiped out. And then there's an expectation, if they're resilient, if they're good people, they'll get right back up again. Well, how do you do that when FEMA is cut? How do you do that when the programs that were supposed to be in place are not in place? How do you do that when the cost of everything goes up and unemployment is up and all of that? How do you do that? How do you practice that resilience that we want to see? How do you do that when those support systems are not in place? So I'm thinking that this whole idea of the expectation of resiliency is that you pop back up again. There's a moral connotation to this. For white European Americans, the expectation of resilience is that it's about individual effort, that your tragedy that you underwent is somehow an indication of a sinful life. Isn't that the case? See that, well, a bad thing happened, somehow you must be a bad person. No! That is not the way that works. And if you can't get back up again, that means you lack moral fiber. No! That is not the way that works. You know, I was doing a lot of study about resilience, and I learned that there are 5 P's and 7 C's and 4 pillars and 10 keys. And I'm sure you're going to hear a lot about that in the next month or so. But what it comes down to is you need to eat right, you need to get good sleep, you need to develop, relationships with people, you need to be proactive, you need to set goals and be persistent and be patient. And that's how to be resilient. And I'm going to tell you that is a white privilege perspective on what resilience is. That is white privilege at work. Different cultures have different approaches to resilience. Latin and indigenous cultures consider resilience to be a community responsibility. If one person in a family is expecting a tax refund and they're like, ooh, I'm going to use this tax refund, and I'm going to go on vacation. And another member of the family says, oh, no. Your cousin needs that $1,500 that you were going to get their car out of the shop. And you say, no, but that's my 15. No, that's your cousin's gift that needs to be learned. Resilience in Asian cultures, and this, I'm sorry to use the term universally, I don't mean to, but this is what research was saying. In many Asian cultures, in many examples, there's resilience seems to be tied into spiritual understandings that are not white Western spiritual understandings, but that in Buddhism, for example, we know the First Noble Truth, life is suffering. It's a poor translation, but it's as close as we get. There's an expectation among many Asian cultures that suffering is just part of it. Suffering is just part of life, and the way that you attend to suffering is by accepting that rather than rejecting it. In Taoism, suffering is part of the way. In other traditions, there's this expectation that we look at suffering and we experience that suffering, and nobody likes it, but there's a gift in there somehow, somewhere. And if we refuse to look at the gift of being knocked down, we will reject that gift until the lesson comes back again. I have been heartbroken, as many of you have been, over the whole Epstein files mess. And now that the files, as many of them are going to be released, have been released, we know that once again, it will be up to these children who were abused to marshal up their stories and their courage to bring charges against these men. Because expecting the victims to be responsible for their abusers' reconciliation somehow is what we do. Is that really what we want resilience to mean? Is that victims are responsible for bringing their aggressors to justice? I don't think so. But what I do hope for is signs of resilience in our capacity to reach out to each other, to hold each other accountable sometimes, to hold each other in expectation of healing and redemption yet to come. Again, all week I've been looking at examples of resistance. Excuse me, not resistance, resilience. One of my favorite examples of resilience are crocuses. They're my favorite flower. They are ridiculous. They poke their fragile little heads through ice and snow, or in our case, 3 extra inches of bark dust. In the middle of January, I see their ridiculous little faces, and I always want to tell them, go back! Wait till it gets warmer. And they don't listen to me. Because crocuses are going to come back on their own time frame. How often do we engage in acts to change the direction of our life, and the friends and the people that we love around us say, no, wait, don't do it. But the crocuses, like you and I, friends, must do so on our own time frame, as spindly and fragile as we might look in those efforts. There's an invitation there from the crocuses to just grow as we will. My crocuses also don't grow as single flowers, they grow in bunches. I like to think that they hold their little roots together, little hands together, to support each other in that process. Resilience the 7 C's, the 5 P's, the 4 pillars, the 10 keys. Has to come back to hope and persistence and grit. I have many friends in my life right now who are going through knee replacements. Yay! And I'm trying to support them, be in contact with them as they're going through this process, and their recoveries do not look like the 90-second montages that we want them to be. Their recoveries involve salty words, often directed at their physical therapist. Their recoveries involve grief for losing what they had or thought they had. Their recoveries involve sometimes hours or days or weeks or even months of just lying about, sometimes in despair. As things go wrong, I have one friend who had her knee replaced, and just as she was getting up, she'd gone out to the grocery store, she came home, and her dog knocked her down, and she broke 2 vertebrae. Oh. Recovery is not a straight line. Our resilience is not a straight line. But our resilience, our hope for resilience, is not about just us eating well and us getting enough sleep and us being great. It's about us being us together. It's about us holding hope for each other. It's about us believing in each other. So friends, I picked these songs today, Precious Lord, Take My Hand. I picked this song over my head because we do not experience resilience. We do not gain our resilience alone. We only do so in community